Hello folks, R1 here. I have a subscriber replay for you today from Sir Skeetimus. He flies with Kings normally, but today he's flying solo. That does not mean, however, that he intends to be anything but a team player. We all know the score when it comes to arcade matches. Normally, the fighters converge in the center of the map, a big furball ensues, and everyone is primarily interested in pumping up their score and their income and experience as high as they possibly can as quickly as they can. Now, you will occasionally find a fighter pilot that is willing to take the time to get up to high altitude, where a lot of the big boy bombers like to dwell. And you need to keep in mind that when they do this, they are sacrificing income and experience for the benefit of the team. It takes a long time to get up to an appropriate altitude, assuming that you're in a fighter that actually can climb well. Now, this Hellcat that Sir Skeetimus is flying is actually pretty good as far as gaining altitude is concerned. And he has a rack of rockets underneath each wing that should make short work of any bombers that he encounters at high altitude. There is actually a third type of player that I haven't really mentioned as of yet, but we'll get into that toward the end of this video. And that third type of player is really what Sir Skeetimus is, and I'm happy to say that. Skeetimus is employing a tactic that I myself have used before, which is to simply turn away from the fight at the beginning of the battle and do nothing except gain altitude. If you head toward the main conflict right off the bat, you will not have gained enough altitude to effectively engage the really high bombers. All you'll be able to go after will be those that have chosen to dive to build up speed at the beginning of the match, and those are not often the most dangerous ones that you will encounter. It's the bomber pilots that are canny enough to stay at high altitude and drop load after load of bombs on your base that are the ones that truly win most of the matches. Well, Sir Skeetimus has finally gained the altitude that he's happy with and has reversed his course and headed back toward the fight. He was keeping an eye on it the whole time, seeing how the fight was progressing. But now it's time for him to actively look for targets over his friendly bases. He sees the first approaching bomber in the distance, and it looks like it's a big fat PBY. You know, when he sent me the email that contained this replay, he kind of criticizes this attack. He got a little bit overexcited as he closed on this PBY, and, well, he launched his whole salvo at it. And I personally have done that many times in the past, particularly in arcade. He will get a reload. It's going to take a while, but he will get one. And it's not like he's dependent on those rockets to take down bombers. His Hellcat is well armed, and particularly when attacking from above like this, his 50 caliber machine guns are more than sufficient to slice clean through the spine of that aircraft and send it on its way to the ground after one pass. That, my friends, is not as easy as it looks. Or at least, it's not as easy as Sir Skeetimus makes it look. He immediately goes vertical and then dives again. Below him is a P-40 that was trying to gain altitude to engage him. And that turns out with a very predictable result. So he's picked up 3 kills in about a minute, which is not a bad way to start the fight. More importantly, they were all pretty valuable kills. Those 2 bombers would have made a serious impact given just a few more minutes. And that P-40 had plenty of altitude to be a threat to anyone who was spawning in, especially friendly bombers. Now, he can't help but notice this incoming Wellington. For some reason, that Wellington pilot has decided to turn on his contrail and put out a nice big red marker telling everyone exactly where to come and kill him. Maybe he was just supremely confident, or perhaps he had a death wish. I'm not really sure which, but it doesn't really work out very well for him as a combat strategy. Well, in the end, he goes out, trailing an even more impressive column of smoke behind him, although it's not the cheerful red that I think he was happiest with. Now, to regain some of that lost altitude and assess the situation. For the moment, the sky over his friendly bases, at high altitude anyway, seems to be completely clear of enemy aircraft. The only thing visible right now is a formation of friendly bombers, Mitchells and another PBY or two heading in the direction of enemy territory. So he's going to swing it around and fall in with this group. Their flight path is going to take him in the direction that he wants to go, and is a likely course to intercept enemy bombers on their way to the more damaged of his friendly bases. More importantly, and this brings me to the third type of player that I mentioned earlier, it allows him an opportunity to provide them with some high cover. Usually when you're a bomber pilot in War Thunder, you're on your own. You might get lucky enough to fly with another bomber on your lonely high-altitude mission, but for the most part, the fighters completely ignore you, at least the friendly fighters do. They have their own agenda. For most fighter pilots in War Thunder, escorting a friendly bomber formation is simply considered a waste of time. Which is very unfortunate, as you've seen a single fighter, well armed and at altitude, can decimate several enemy bombers in short order. So, since bomber attacks on ground targets can win the match very easily, doesn't it make sense that you might spend some time protecting those bombers? Well, there's a simple reason why most fighter pilots don't. It's because it takes time. Time when they could be down at lower altitudes going after a much higher concentration of enemy fighters. Enemy fighters that, if they kill them, translate into wealth and experience. It's quite understandable. I wish the mechanics in War Thunder encouraged fighter pilots to actually escort their bomber formations. It was a critical job during the war, and it should be a critical function in War Thunder. Now, speaking of a threat to our friendly bombers, there's an enemy bomber there, so since he's opened fire on our PBYs, this is kind of combining interdicting enemy bombers with protecting our own. But our friendly bombers have nothing to fear. Sir Skeetimus is on it. Now, an H-6K can be a formidable target. It is heavily armed, even if it is a big, slow float plane, and it can absorb a lot of 50 caliber shells, even when attacking from a position of height, as Sir Skeetimus is. But there's a simpler way to take one out. Use a rocket instead. Sir Skeetimus has redeemed himself for launching that full salvo at that first PBY. That was a very nice, very clean kill. There are no other targets immediately visible, so he proceeds to rejoin the bomber group on its way to its destination. They are in the process of bombing the enemy airfield. The bases have already been destroyed, and they can focus their efforts on this singular target. I believe that PBY has already completed one pass and is pulling range so it can reload its bombs and swing around for another go. Sir Skeetimus is going to stick close. This is a dangerous time for the bombers. It's very apparent to the entire enemy team exactly where these bombers are and what they're doing. And there are plenty of enemy fighters still in the air. This will also be very, very near to the enemy spawn point, although it would be at a significantly lower altitude. Any fighter that spawns in now or approaches from distance should be easily available to Sir Skidamus long before it gets within a threatening range. Since there are no other bombers apparent anywhere within visual range, he should have no problem ensuring victory for his team if he just sticks close to these bombers. And that's exactly what he intends to do. Perhaps it's as a salute to the fallen Wellington pilot, or perhaps it's just a little bit of well-justified cockiness, but he pops smoke as well, highlighting his position to the enemy team. That PBY is turning around to initiate its next bombing run. He cuts it off after a second, but, well, there's really no threat. It's one thing to be in a bomber and have your smoke going as you enter enemy territory. It's another thing to be a good 2.5 kilometers above wherever the enemy may likely spawn in it. Personally, I think he was just trying to encourage the enemy team to try just a little bit harder to get up to his altitude. He would have had all the advantage in a situation like that and could have probably scored another easy kill or two with very, very little threat to himself. So really, in this situation, why not? He pops the smoke back on, slows himself down, pops his flaps, and waggles his wings at the PBY as he falls into a close formation with him. Talk about having a close escort. Well, I don't know if I were that PBY pilot if I would be really happy he's there, or if it would make me a little bit nervous being quite that close. It's not the easiest thing in the world for a Hellcat to stay at that slow a speed and remain in the air, particularly at that altitude. But Sir Skidamus seems to handle his plane just fine. Unfortunately, Sir Skidamus's bait is not risen to by the enemy fighters, but at least it's a very, very flamboyant way to end the match. So what do you think? Do you agree with me? Should there be bigger rewards, perhaps to the Bomber Protector award that you can win now that's rather small? Perhaps if that were boosted, it would encourage players to partake in this activity a little bit more often. Or perhaps there should be certain missions that a fighter pilot can elect to take when he enters a match that would provide those bonuses inherently for bombers that were safely escorted back and forth on their bombing runs. I don't know. You tell me, what do you think a good solution to this would be? I just think it's an aspect of war that War Thunder doesn't illustrate very well. Let me know what you think in the comments below. This match is just about over. The final load of bombs is being dropped on the airfield. As a matter of fact, it's just fallen. The PBY is going to go ahead and drop his load of bombs because, you know, it's the only way to be sure. I want to take a moment and thank Sir Skidamus for turning in this replay. It was excellent and extremely colorful. And I hope that he and the Kings have a lot of success in the future. That's all I have for you folks this time around. So, until I see you again, red smoke or not, good hunting.